Okay, so I'm going to talk about what it might take to do better. I'll explain why in a little bit. Just a little bit of background to this. Don't have a clicker. Okay, so the background to this is I'm going to talk a little bit about my new book, A Climate of Truth. But the story behind it is, the first book I wrote was How Bad a Banana is the Carbon Footprint of Everything. And it dates back to an era in which, a time when it felt as though we were all waking up to climate change, and if we just knew more about the carbon numbers, then we'd be able to manage the problem better, and it would be part of what it would take to get on top of the whole climate situation. That's okay, but it wasn't dealing with the climate crisis. Global emissions were still going up and up and up and up. So I kind of co-wrote this book, A Burning Question, which was saying, look, climate problem is a global systemic problem. And there's some stuff about the dynamics that we need to get our heads around. The fact that efficiency improvements are part of the dynamics of growth, actually. And that if just piecemeal efforts on their own aren't enough because they get absorbed at the global system level, and we get rebound effects that are absolutely show-stopping things that every policymaker needs to have their heads around. So we wrote The Burning Question, talking about the exponential growth on the emissions curve. And then a few years later, I wrote There's No Planet B, because it was clear that if we want to deal with climate, which we still weren't getting anywhere on, we needed to treat it as one symptom of a much wider thing that's going on, a polycrisis, which I'll talk more about in a minute, and I talk a lot more about in my new book, A Climate of Truth. But I wrote A Climate of Truth because we are really not getting anywhere. At the global level, we are not getting anywhere. I'll explain what I mean by that later. And so what do you do if you're not getting anywhere for year after year? Well, do you just carry on with the same approach? Or do you stand back from the problem and ask, all right, what is it that's stopping us getting somewhere? What are the reasons behind the reasons why we're not getting anywhere? Because if we can understand that better, we might stand a chance of getting to the core of the blockage and starting to make progress for the first time. So let's see. If I can just stop my laptop from falling off the thing. Okay, so Climate of Truth. And I'm going to start with some reasonably uncomfortable truths. And the reason I'm doing it is not because I like doom and glooming. It's because, as James Baldwin said, not everything that's faced can be changed, but nothing can be changed until it is faced. So we have to face the situation properly in the eye. So let's have a look. We've had these 29 COPs, right, over 3 decades now, to deal with the crystal clear scientific consensus that climate is a big deal and we need to deal with it at the global level. And actually, the fossil fuel companies have known this for about 60 years, but the scientific consensus has been clear for at least 30. So let's see how these COPs have got on. So here's a graph of global emissions from fossil fuel use. And I've drawn a little marker in there for COP1 at 1995. And you can't see any trace of evidence from this that those COPs have done anything at all. It's a pretty brutal reality. But every year that line goes higher still. And the height of that line represents the speed at which we are making things worse. So in other words, every year we are making the climate worse by a larger amount than we made it worse the year before. So we have to somehow find a way of being pretty dramatically more effective. And, there's the 1.5 budget going out of the window completely, just in case there's anyone here who's in doubt about that. And this is a stat I only just kind of refreshed myself on recently. So there's global energy use back in 1995, the year we had the first one of those COPs. And in brown there, I've got the fossil energy. And in green, I've got all the non-fossil energy. Nuclear, hydro, renewables, the lot. So let's have a look at how things were in 2022. That's the most recent IEA data I could get for this. So let's have a look. Ooh, that's good, isn't it? Look at how the non-renewable energy has grown, about 75%. But I think some of you probably guessed what I'm going to show next. That's how the fossil fuel grew in that period of time, alongside the growth in renewables, about 66%. Barely any difference in those two growth rates. Key thing here is to notice is we do need more renewables, but they have to replace the fossil fuel supply. They don't on their own do that. That's a kind of key key reality that everyone in this conference needs to have their head around. Okay, a bit of even bigger context. The big context is we are here in the Anthropocene now, by which I mean the era in which it's humans that are the biggest thing affecting the ecosystem. We've been in it for maybe 50 years. We've had a few decades of being able to live as if we're not in it and get away with it. But those days are over now. We are such a powerful species, and the climate crisis is just one symptom of our inability so far to adapt to this new context in which we're living. And what's challenging about that is that virtually everything about how we do life, how we run conferences, how we think about economics, how we solve problems, how we do our politics, how we run society, all of that has, broadly speaking, been honed in a pre-Anthropocene context. So the urgent challenge now is to adapt the way that we do practically everything until such time as it is Anthropocene fit. So the result of not having yet adapted to this Anthropocene is we're accelerating into this polycrisis. And I've just drawn a few key elements out of it here. So, we're all here talking about climate, but it's important to remember a bigger context. Climate is just one symptom of our unfitness for the Anthropocene. So, obviously, we need to do an energy transition alongside dealing with climate. We need to do that whilst we have a rising population. I've got some good news about that. Don't have time to talk about it now, but it's all in the book. We need to feed that rising population, despite the fact that we're hemorrhaging our biodiversity, despite the fact that our soils are starting to get less productive, and despite the fact we're getting impacts from climate change. Meanwhile, we've got a pollution problem, of which one part of that is plastics. I'll just talk very quickly about that because it's not strongly enough on our radar. The growth rate on plastic production and plastic pollution is about 3 times what the growth rate on fossil fuel use has ever been. And practically all the plastic in the world has been produced in my lifetime. There's about 6 billion tons of it currently in existence. And it contains about 16,000 chemicals. And those 16,000 chemicals, about 8,000 of them have been tested for human health concerns, of which about 4,000 have been found to have been of concern to human health. They are disrupting our endocrine system, which is giving rise to cancers, getting in the way of our fertility. We don't quite know. There's emerging science over just how serious this is, but it's even more serious, it's even more permanent than fossil fuel, and we're arguably even more addicted to it, and the growth rate is a lot faster. So we're going to be hearing a lot more about plastics in the future. And just by the way, it's not just our endocrine system that's being disrupted. Every animal in the world is having its endocrine system disrupted. And those microplastics, by the way, are in practically every organ of every person in this room right now. Are in the brains of unborn babies. Okay. And then we've got some disease threats that are related to that as well. I'll just skim through this stuff. It looks to me like a very serious situation that we are hurtling towards. We are not on balance making progress because although some good things are happening, they are not outpacing the bad things that are happening. And it looks to me, we can all speculate on this, but I would be surprised if we would be able to continue on a kind of business as usual trajectory of accelerating into the problem for another 20 years. I wouldn't be surprised if we're unable to continue like this for another 10. I think it feels much, much closer up the problem than it was certainly when I started working on this agenda 20 years ago. So I think this is a very serious situation. I think we're hurtling into what will be an incredibly uncomfortable time for humanity if we can't wake up and start taking effective action. That's what I think, but I just want a quick show of hands, see what you think about it. So I'm just going to ask you in a second to put up your hand. If you think the situation is about as serious as I've said, put up your hand. If you think, just in a sec, and then I'm going to ask you if you think I've fundamentally exaggerated the seriousness, to put up your hand, and then I'm going to ask you if you think it's even worse than I've said, to put up your hand. So first up, if you think it's about as serious, can you put up your hand? Okay, lots and lots of hands in the air. if you think I've fundamentally exaggerated the seriousness, can you put up your hand? There is one. I'll talk to you afterwards. There's one hand in the air. If you think it's fundamentally more serious than I've said, can you put up your hand? There's a few hands going up. Me too, actually, because I haven't finished yet, and there's a lot I haven't had time to go into. Okay, so the point I want to make here is that we all get it, right? We all get it that this is a very, very serious situation. I think that is, and I do this, I've done this experiment with like thousands, more than 10,000 people now, and I always get the same result. So I think that gives a permission and a responsibility to challenge anything that you hear that is not commensurate with dealing with that serious situation. So, okay, and so, you can choose to look the other way, but you can't ever again say that you didn't know we were in this situation. So it's a critical moment right now. I've got some good news. Here's my little sketch. You'll have to buy the book. I haven't got time to go through it, but, it's not the technology that's stopping us. We can do the energy transition. We've got practically everything we need for the energy transition. All I want to talk about very quickly is a few key elements of it. So on the right-hand side there, this is the most important thing. We need to reduce energy demand. We don't talk about that anything like enough. Some countries need a bit more energy, but at the global level, we need less of it. Because that's the only way that the renewables are going to succeed in replacing the fossil fuel, which they're currently not doing. That takes me to the left-hand side. We need to reduce the rate at which fossil fuel comes out of the ground, and more renewables, whilst they're a helpful thing, they do not on their own lead to that happening. That's such a critical thing to understand. So if you hear a company saying, oh yeah, we believe in a green future, so that's why we're pushing renewables, we have to understand that may be part of the picture, but only alongside a constraint on fossil fuel. Okay. So that takes us into, maybe if all these things are technically solvable, which they are, takes us into the middle layer of this polycrisis. I call it a meta-crisis, actually. What is it about our politics, our economics, and our business that it's not working properly? Can we deal with this with such high rates of inequality? I would say not. It's unsurprising that in an economics framework which has been honed pre-Anthropocene, it's not surprising that it might need more than a bit of a tweak to become Anthropocene fit. It dates back to an era in which we could grow anything we wanted to. If we wanted more stuff, we could just dig more out of the ground. And if we made a mess through our experiments, it's okay, the planet will put itself back together again. Those days are over now. And our economics needs to reflect that. And the logic of the argument, for example, that GDP growth as a central metric of economic success is a completely broken framework for thinking about things, is so simple, so clear, so robust, and yet so widely ignored that it's just a kind of a crazy disconnect. I'm going to just skip through a few slides since the slides aren't working anymore. Oh, there we go, we're back again. Okay, what's in this curve of human response to difficult news? Originally developed to understand how humans respond to news of their own terminal illness. But, humanity is spread out across this grief transition curve now. There are people denying it, there are people being angry about it, there are people getting depressed about it, and what we've all got to do is take ourselves to the point where we accept it. Not just in the basic facts of climate change, but the depth of change that is required, how much we need to unpick about all of this. Okay, I need to move for speed. But, at the center of this meta-crisis, I think there are some values that we have to have now if we are going to get through. First up, respect for all people in the world, whoever they are, whatever country they come from and however rich they are. We haven't got to look around far to see that we're a million miles away from that within countries and between countries. Respect for the environment, of course, but I want to just focus for a minute on respect for truth, because we're not getting anywhere at all on this agenda because of fundamental dishonesty. The cops have been corrupted by fundamental dishonesty from vested interests from the fossil fuel industry. The business community, there is a lot of nonsense being pushed out to support vested interests. The media is not helping us always, and we have seen a lot of dishonesty from a lot of politicians over the last few years, and we're seeing some on the global stage right now. Okay, I'm going to sort of cut to the quick because I haven't got much time. This transition that we need is not a hair shirt, it's an opportunity if we get it right. But I'm not going to sugarcoat this. Having not taken the action we need to on the climate crisis for a good 3 decades now, it is really coming around to bite us. The scientific community is very alarmed now about the threat of cascading tipping points and so on, which you'll have to get the book if you want to read more about that. But we're going to need a dose of luck if we're going to create a better future now. It might be possible, but we're going to need some luck as well as incredibly strong action. So, all this in the book, but just final thoughts on what this means for us here in this conference. We've all said we get it, practically all of us said we get it. It's a very, very serious situation we're in. We get it that we haven't been making progress so far. We've got to call out things that aren't right. We've got to call out anything that is said or done in any of the meetings or any of the talks that you may hear in this conference and in your workplaces that are not commensurate with the kind of waking up that we've got to do right now. So I think it's a time to be really brave. In some countries, you can see, if you're in the United States right now, working in a university, if you're going to stand up for honesty, then it takes a lot of courage right now. Right now in the UK, in most situations, it doesn't take that much courage. You're unlikely to be put in prison for it, just for saying what you think. But if we don't wake up and call this stuff out, then we are sleepwalking into a very, very dire situation. So I'm going to call on everybody here to say, in this conference, it's not okay to walk away from it going, oh yeah, we had a lovely time, made some lovely contacts, and you talked about some lovely stuff going on. All that was great. We need to challenge anything at all that is not right and is not commensurate with getting on top of this polycrisis. So, for example, if you think that it's not okay for a tobacco company to be advertising itself at this conference, a company that makes its living out of killing people, then please tell the organizers about it. If you go along to a company and you're on their stand and you hear a kind of bullshit narrative that you don't think is commensurate with really getting to grips with this problem, then challenge them about it. If you hear an argument or a narrative that has steeped within it a kind of sense of the way that economics needs to go that you don't go along with, then it is really important to be brave and be the uncomfortable one and call it out. Because we've got to get the change. If we don't wake up now, we are going to be in an incredibly uncomfortable situation. I think that's my time up. Thank you all for listening. Enjoy the conference.